Hey guys and girls, it's Blackjack with 396 Guitars. We have the Peavy Milestone 12. 12 stands for 12 strings. We cleaned it up. We refer to the previous video. We found some wonky electronics, but spoke to the owner. We're going to move forward. The guitar will play. I think we're going to restring it and set it up and see where that takes us. But I'm pretty confident that it'll be okay. So yeah, there's some stuff going on here. We'll get to it and I'll describe it as we get along. Let's get to work. Camera lottery, we're all set. Strings are off. I cleaned up the guitar. Remember the previous video, we got the cover off and there's all kinds of oil and goop going on in there. Now, I'm going to try to clean up that control cavity and get some of that oil and goop that somebody put in there, some misguided effort to protect electronic solder joints, ill-advised. We'll get into that later. We had checked out the truss rod and we tightened up all the hardware in it. Mainly the bridge was extremely loose. It was actually moving around. So string of choice, yeah, we're gonna move forward with the restring on it. Now, of course, we're gonna pause a couple of times during this because, yeah, 12 strings are fun to restring, to say the least. Any of you who have not done it before, I recommend that you take a tutorial on it. It's a little bit different. It's not like doing a 6-string, but it's got, the octave strings to deal with. So you always start with the heavier string, and then there will be an octave string next to it. So it's important where you place them, and we're going to start with the low E. Thank God this is not a floating bridge type style, because those can be even more fun. This is a relatively light set. I don't know if they would call them a light set. 40 to 8. Yeah, 12 strings are usually a little bit lighter anyway. So just like any other electric guitar, you run the string through there. When you get up to here, it can get a little confusing, but if you pay attention, it's relatively simple. The larger string from the E, A, D, and G have a larger string and then an octave string. After the G, when you get to the B and the high E, they're actually the same gauge. You tune them exactly the same, but you still have to string them correctly so that one goes above the other and they don't get in each other's way. So yeah, you start with the low E, and I'm pretty sure, let me get my googly eyes on, because sometimes these back saddles can be a little bit different on 12 strings. Yeah, they actually, Peavy, I gotta say, I don't mind Peavy products. I've used Peavy amps in my career. I've never played a Peavy bass guitar or had one in my stable, but I gotta say, Peavy is well thought out gear usually. So the reason I say that is because they actually took the time to make one hole bigger than the other, and some of them are not 12 string, which makes it even more confusing for the at-home restringer. So the low E, and we're going to do the low E and the A on film to show some repetitiveness and continuity. Goes not to the edge slot. That's where the octave string, the smaller string, is going to go. So I always start with the bigger low E. That goes on the second slot and it goes to the second peg, right? Second slot, second peg, and then the octave string is going to go into the first slot, first peg. It can get confusing. All other basic principles apply, or processes. String is going to live here. You want at least a couple of wraps on there. So being that they're a little closer together, go a peg and a half, bend it, and get it through the hole. Same as always, first wrap above the string hole, every other successive wrap below the string hole. And you always want to be mindful of your saddle on the other end. We'll get to that in just a second. That you're actually in the saddle slot. And I trim these off close to 1.5 to 2 inches as you're doing them. Now let's just make sure we're in the right hole and the right saddle slot, and we're not. See? Make sure you're in the saddle slot. Yeah, gets tricky. Gets tricky. And you follow the saddle slot with the nut slot. If you're going to the second nut slot, you want to be in the second slot on the saddle. 12 strings, not my favorite. This should be our octave E string. Let's make certain. Yep. Ernie is usually pretty good about making sure that they're in order in the pack, but don't always go by that. I got busted the other day stringing up a Les Paul. Now this one, smaller hole down here, outside hole, outside nut slot. That's going to ride right next to the other string. Whether it's going to be correct or not, we don't know until we get done with this. They look really, really, really close, but we'll see. Same thing, you're going to go about a peg and a half. Something there, catching my finger. I think I got stabbed by a piece of string left over from de-stringing. Sorry if my head is in the way. It is. I've been trying different camera angles lately, and it doesn't matter where I go, my head gets in the way. Make sure you're in the saddle. Yep. Now we're not going to try to tune until we get the A, both of the E, the low E and the A on first, those 4 strings. Then we're going to start tuning. And each time we put a new string on, we're going to tune it and then go back and start at the low end and tune all the way. And by the time we get to the 12th string up here, all of these strings should have been stretched, flatted, stretched, flatted, stretched, flatted, and retuned every time. So you can avoid, all you got to do is stretch the last few wire strings. Let's make sure. You're talking about very little room. See, like that one was not in the saddle. Yeah, you gotta look. And if you're not paying attention, you'll get, after 12 of them, one of them won't be in the saddle, one of them won't be in the right nut slot. Pay attention and check your work as you go along. Let's move on to the A. We didn't tune this. We have no idea where they're at, but so far it doesn't look horrible. There's no way to adjust lateral string spacing. These things are what they are. These strings are going to land where they land. And that is out of my control. All right. The large A string into the large hole. I know this sounds like I'm talking to infants, but if you haven't done this, this is how you do it. Go to the large hole, large nut slot. Go to the second A peg, not the first one. If it's going to live there, it's going to live there, you need to go past it. And trust me, I've made my share of mistakes on these. They get confusing, having the extra 6 strings, the extra 6 machine heads. The extra 6 saddle slots. Don't bring it home until you have it in the saddle and in the correct nut slot and in the correct peg. Yahtzee. I think we're there. I think we're there. Turn that one down. Next. It gets monotonous and tedious and all those other adjectives. String's going to live there. It's going to live there. So measure past a little bit, make your bend. All those same rules apply. It just takes, you would think, twice as long, but it actually takes about 4 times as long. Because not only does this process take time, tuning it and retuning it and retuning it. See, what I do is I sight down and go, oh, that looks good, until you get down here and it's way wide, which means the string popped off and it did not want to go into the saddle slot on its own. There you go. These are really close together, these. Never understood it, why anybody would want a 12 string. They're so persnickety. They just don't like to behave. But lots of songs that we know and love and grew up with, 12-string sound. Now we're going to plug in and start checking tuning as we go. Point of note, try to pull these down as you do them so they're not sticking straight up, because these little bastards will stab you. And that is no fun. They're going to keep going flat and keep going flat for days. I need a pick. I need a pick. I rarely use a pick because I don't play guitar and I don't use one playing bass hardly ever. Where did I put all my picks? Well, I had a bunch of them. Well, I guess we're not going to use a pick. And remember, you have 2 E's, 2 A's. Two D's, 2 G's. Just doing these 4 strings, the E and the A, is going to take up all my video time. Like that. It seems like an inordinate amount of space down here. I don't know why. It might be because it's not going to be until we get the rest of the strings on, because it seems like these saddles are trying to pull in that direction. Way too much space down here. It might just be an optical delusion, because we're in saddles and they are tuning up. So far, so good. So you see how long it took me to do just the E's and the A's. Imagine now I have to continue on. So I'm going to save video time as usual. You saw that coming. I'm going to string the rest of them up, and I'm going to stretch them as I go. They seem like they really want to stretch a lot. I'm a little concerned about this. Seems like a really wide gap here, but once we get them all on there, as long as everything pulls together tight and we look down on sight and we have good string spacing, we'll be okay. I mean, sometimes I get sidetracked. All right, I'm going to pause while I put the rest of these on, and we'll be right back. What will seem like an instant for you will probably be more like 45 minutes to me. Stand by. So I wanted to point out one thing. On a 12 string, E, A, D, the large string is always to the right, and the octave string is to the left. The low string goes to the second peg. The octave string goes to the first peg, and you follow that pattern until you get to the G. Now on the G, because the tuners are on the other side, they're not all on one side, otherwise the headstock would be up to here. It switches, so you still go into the large hold down on the bridge, but when you get up here, you're going to switch and put the large string to the left and go to the top peg, then to the right slot to the bottom peg, and you follow that. When you get to the B, and G is the only one that's really like that, but you still have to follow the same pattern down here and here. Okay, so it flips. E, A, D is this way. G, B, and high E are switched, if that makes any sense. But you still follow the same, go peg. But instead of going, see the low E here is in the right side nut slot. The octave is in the left side nut slot. Over here it changes. You're still going to go up to the farther away peg. There's no easy way to explain it, because you don't want that string to be in the way of the octave string that's going to come right next to it. And it's only that way because you're on the other side, and it's like a mirror image when you get to the other side. So I wanted to point that out. And everything else is the same. You still are going to measure and wind it the same. None of that changes. But it gets tricky. You got to pay attention. So I'll be right back. So we finally have all of the strings on. I have not trimmed them. Epic fail. What we have is, and I noticed this almost instantly as soon as I was stringing it. I got the E and the A strung up, and I go, wow, there's a lot of space in there. And remember, I mentioned that somebody had replaced this brass nut, and it's much thinner on this reveal than it is on this reveal. And once we got it all strung up and tuned, the high E is hanging off of the fretboard. The string is literally, you can't fret it. It's literally hanging off of the fretboard. And the only way I would have known that was when I got the guitar, it was strung up as a stick string. And a clue should have been that the high E, they actually had it on the inside slot, not on the outside slot as the rest of them were. Yeah, epic fail. I don't know if it's the pocket, the neck pocket is cut wrong, or if this was, maybe it was never a 12 string to begin with, because we've got some boogered up shit going here where something is not copacetic here. And once I strung it up, you've got way too much string spacing, and what happens is, and even on the low E side, I noticed it. I go, oh, The harmonic E, it's right where the fret starts to round off the board. Over here, the string is literally off. Come on. The string is literally off of the board. It's not even, if you were trying to fret notes up here, the string isn't even on the board. It literally is, it's past the rounded part of the fret down here. The only place you could actually grab it is the first 3 frets. After that, it continues to go farther and farther and farther off the board. This neck on this end needs to tilt in this way, and that can only be the way the neck pocket was cut. I don't know any other explanation. And if you do that, if you start to tilt this out, this string's going to come off the fretboard. It could be all in the nut, because this nut was so boogered, the nut and the bridge and string spacing, it all works together. Fail. Fail. Sorry to have bad news. You never know what you're going to run into. It's Blackjack with 396 guitars. I'm going to have to talk to the customer and have a heart-to-heart with him on this. Thank God he did not spend a lot of money on this guitar, but somebody took him for a couple of $100. We'll talk soon.